Chapter 11. Acre. Sabrina had long ago exceeded her allotment of hot water, but she still sat in the cold shower, staring at the drain. The blood, the dust, the ash were all gone. She was left with nothing. She barely felt the cold, although she could see her limbs beginning to shake, her skin taut with goosebumps. She realized the clicking noise she heard was the sound of her teeth chattering. She wrapped her arms about her knees and pulled them closer to her chest and wept, her arms and thighs absorbing the sound of her sobbing. Leaving this stream was unimaginable. Here she could close her eyes and lose herself to the tumbling, tapping waterfall on her head. Under that icy drumming, there was no past, no future, just now. "Sabrina!" Sean was pounding on the door. He had been checking on her every few minutes. How long had he been pounding this time? "Sabrina, say something or I'm coming in." "Go away." The door handle shook, then splintered apart as he kicked in the door. The curtain peeled back. "Isa, Sabrina." Her body was shaking as he pulled her up. She caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her skin had turned so pale that her veins stood out starkly. Her lips were drained of any pink. "I'm blue," she mumbled, shock taking over. Sean's sleeve was wet and cold where he had reached in to pull her out. A female counseling officer appeared in the doorway. Sabrina could not take another stranger in her home. "Get out! Get out!" she screamed. "Get her out!" She struck at Sean, punching him, kicking him as best as the small space would allow, until he wrapped her in a large towel and then his arms, squeezing her until she could not breathe. There seemed a precise moment when under the pressure of his embrace her sorrow had nowhere to go, and something inside her broke. She wept so violently and suddenly that she did not care if the other cadets and officers stationed outside her door heard. She woke in her bed, wrapped tightly in blankets. The first thing she saw was the frame that held the picture of her with Lindsay's family at the beach. The photo was in the frame Lindsay had made for her. It exploded with color, its smooth sides broken by the ceramic caterpillars she had fashioned at the edges, each segment of their bodies a different color. The happy figures in the picture seemed to mock her. "When did it begin, Lindsay? Were you betraying us even then? When could I have helped?" She remembered that day vividly. It was not their first trip to the shore, but it was the first time they had ventured out into the surf on wave boards. Timing her strokes to catch the momentum of a wave, riding its force, just teetering on the edge of chaos, did not captivate Lindsay the way it had Sabrina. Lindsay preferred swimming out beyond the breakers, where they could float on their boards for untold stretches of time, staring after the shafts of sunlight that continued into the sea's depths. During one of these interludes, Sabrina had spied an unusual fish moving slowly below the surface. It was not until she pinched it between her fingers that she realized it was not a fish at all, but a paisley ribbon gone loose from Lindsay's braids. "You can do much more interesting things with your hair than I can," Sabrina had said. "This rat's nest?" Lindsay replied, reaching up to her head. "At least you add color and stuff to yours." Sabrina slapped the water with the stray ribbon. "Mine is just black." "But it's beautifully black." Lindsay turned and rebalanced on her board. "Black like the sky between the stars. Black like the ocean depths." "No one writes poems about the sky between the stars." Lindsay's hands and feet slapped at the water as she moved closer. "But those things keep the sparkly, effervescent, and capricious parts in place." Sabrina put down the picture before her tears blurred her vision. She remembered the day they had exchanged the frames, how she had felt a hollow open in her chest, seeing the intricate artwork on Lindsay's, the suctioned feet of the caterpillars, the markings on their backs, the expressions on their faces. Her own was no more than a sleek silver-black frame that she had bought from a shop on Searle Street. Yet Lindsay had hugged Sabrina's gift to her breast. When Sabrina had protested, insisting that she would buy a more elaborate one, Lindsay had refused. "No! It's elegant! Streamlined, tough." She ran her fingers over the steel of its frame. It's you! Sabrina rolled on her back and stared up at the ceiling. To her surprise, they had been gentle with her at the station, keeping the questioning session brief. But what reason did they have to doubt her? She had just brought in her best friend. Her commitment was unquestionable now. Not only that, she had raided a network of occultists on her own. Well, not on her own. With the help of 2 Elveds. She had not been conscious, but the machine had lifted her out of the ruined building and deposited her at the barricades that the T-men had set up around the old factory, after Sean had called for additional support. Since both machines had switched into a more lethal attack mode, it was lucky that she and Lindsay had been spared. The officers and T-men both were at a loss to explain it. Her fingers traced the places on her body where the damnable thing had shocked her. Her skin was still tender, and her hands recoiled when she touched a particularly sore region. She slipped out of bed and crossed to her closet. Her communicator was off, but she did not bother to activate it. The noise of her footsteps roused Sean, who was sleeping propped in the doorway, still in his patrol suit. One of her blankets was across his legs. His hair was sticking up from a night leaning against the wall. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and he needed to shave. The female counseling officer had helped her to put on her pajamas the night before. She was by no means indecent, but Sean averted his eyes anyway. "Hey," was all she could manage.
"Hey,"
he said, rubbing his neck and wincing.
"I'm glad you slept."
"It had been a while," she said, pulling a dress uniform from a hanger. She noticed her patrol suit missing. She wondered if they would ever give her one again. As if reading her thoughts, Sean said,
"They're not going to enact any disciplinary action against you. You brought your friend in. You led us all there. 190 occultists captured. People are talking about a commendation. No cadet has ever..."
"How many killed?"
I don't...
"Sean."
56. At least that is the estimate.
She pulled the uniform off the hanger and stepped into the bathroom to change. It was no use trying to close the door. The frame had been shattered when he kicked it in. "What do you think?" she said, pulling on her trousers. "Of a commendation."
"As your supervisor?"
"As my friend."
"I wouldn't want to be you."
He seemed to regret his words immediately.
"I'm sorry. I didn't mean..."
"I know what you mean," she said, speaking to her own reflection, a face she did not seem to recognize. "She's my best friend, Sean. Like a sister. If I had known, I wouldn't have..." He silenced her with a shush.
"I know, but don't say it. Not to me."
Strands of her hair stuck to the bottom of the sink. She pulled elastic from the nearest cabinet and wrestled her hair into a ponytail. When she emerged from the bathroom, she was the picture of a polished professional officer. Sean straightened up and tried, without success, to flatten the hair on the side of his head. "Help yourself to any food in the cold box," she said, picking up her comm cube and clicking it on.
"Where are you going?"
The moment she activated it, the cube buzzed in her palm. There was only one message, but she knew exactly what it would say even before she read it. She could nearly hear the edge in Dag's voice as she read his words in the message field.
"See me. Immediately."
As she had anticipated, the guards and the counselor outside her apartment door had received strict, if inexplicable, orders that Cadet Sabrina was to be allowed to move freely and unaccompanied as soon as she emerged from her apartment. Only Sean, who had been focused so intently on her, had not known. She did not offer him any explanation. Instead, she only waited to ensure he would not follow her before she climbed into her CRP and started south for the head ministry. It seemed as if her uncle's will had been enforced upon the breadth of the city. Traffic flowed in her favor. Crosswalks remained empty. When she reached the head ministry, the front gate was opened, and the guards remained in their control booths. She did not encounter a single soul as she marched through the halls. The heavy security door that led to the most forbidden space in the entire land between the walls, the old city, opened automatically for her. She stepped through into a different time. The alleyways were narrow and snaking, the buildings alongside them a chaotic mix of shapes, sizes, and materials. Some were built purely of flat stones packed one atop the other. These were mostly collapse, their interiors filling with drifts of sand. Other houses of hardier construction remained steadfast, the heavier mason-cut stones smooth to the touch, and still standing in even rows. In some places the walls were plain and utilitarian. In others, they were carved with alcoves for lamps or shops, or simply for benches. The alleyways were a maze, with no plan or reason to them. Nothing like the straight, eminently rational designs of Fortinbras and Lysander. Sabrina had always loved them for this very reason. It had taken her years as a child to learn them all, but learn them she did, losing herself for hours, sometimes days at a time. She had never grown scared, because she knew if lost, she could walk until she reached the ocean that bordered the old city on 3 sides, the head ministry building the 4th. It was when she had been lost that she had stumbled upon her most incredible finds. Domed towers, soaring steeples, a courtyard of colonnades, gardens grown wild into a veritable forest within sandy, heat-cracked walls. Now, like old friends, the passageways offered her small details to help her find her way. A leaning column, a tree that had long ago broken out of its pot to spread its roots over the stone path, a rusting gate, a dry fountain, a stopped clock. In places, she had to climb over the wreckage of wooden balconies whose rotted joists had sent them crashing into the walkway. In another, she found her way blocked by a collapsed wall, noting the damage that time was taking with some sadness. How long before this magical place would be gone? But the ruined wall opened the way to the shore, allowing sunlight to flood into a passageway that had been locked in shadow for unknown centuries. Grasshoppers chirped and snapped into the air as she waded through the grass that had grown up between the collapsed bricks. Along the shore she stopped and listened to the gentle slurp of water snapping at the bases of the remaining buildings. Across the water, between her and the eastern shore of the bay, the ruins of an unnamed tower rode the waves, aprons of surf sloughing off its rocky base and swirling the long strands of algae clinging to its rocks. How long would he wait? She walked a few more steps along the shore before turning to follow the sequence of passages that led her to the tunnel that traversed the width of the peninsula. How she had feared it as a child, the long, dark, unlit blackness. Now, in its tomb-like darkness, she felt safe for the first time, completely invisible to the prying, judgmental eyes that awaited her outside. If only my life could end right here, right now, in this darkness. The wooden walkway beneath her feet creaked with each step as she progressed through the tunnel. As a child, this passage through the cold darkness beneath the city had always seemed to last an eternity. Now it was over too quickly, for she knew her uncle waited on the other side. Dim light appeared, and the yellowing stones of the curving roof became visible again. A breeze pushed the smell of dust and mortar from her nose, and replaced it with the scent of the salt sea. Her eyes stung as she stepped back into the light. The sea opened up before her, the hills above Fortinbras, dim green outlines on the northern horizon. Dag was standing in the sea. The city had collapsed here where the waves had undermined the foundations of an old fort, leaving a crater in the peninsula. Green water lapped up onto the shelf, creating a large wading pool where the abrupt drop-off into deeper waters was marked by piles of ruins that had once been the seaward buttresses of the fortress. Dag was barefoot, his trousers rolled to his knees, his ministry jacket replaced by a white shirt, its tails untucked and curling in the breeze. He would have been the picture of a relaxed beach walker if it were not for his stillness and his hands clasped behind his back so tightly that his knuckles were white. So much for looking like a polished professional, she thought, removing her boots. She could not bring herself to roll her trousers. From the ankles up, she would cling to the appearance of an officer. It may be the last time I can. He was standing beside a pile of rubble, staring into the deeper water. He did not move when she stepped up next to him. His eyes were red and the skin beneath them dark. She doubted he had slept all night. Sunlight, reflected from the badge on her breast, danced on the surface of the restless water.
"Here, some of the ancient invaders created a fortress," he said, his voice weak and soft.
He spoke slowly, as if sedated or exhausted.
"They were one of the host of many that invaded these lands. So many. All drunk on the certainty that what they were doing was condoned by a divine will. They killed for it. Killed, Sabrina. We are the only creatures that kill their own on such a scale. Why?"
A wave crashed between the piles of stone, its foam spreading out around their legs. His eyes followed the swirl of water as if the answer was hidden there.
"Faith, religiosity, godliness. These things have caused more suffering, pain, and death than all the plagues combined."
He turned his gaze to the horizon where clouds rose up in ridges even higher than the green hills of Fortinbras. From this distance, the metal fences and spires of lights and security sensors were invisible. Hills 36 and 34 were gentle slopes, wrapped in blue.
When they brought about the weapons that would lead to their ultimate destruction, the scientists wrote that they had harnessed the fire of stars, the hand of the Lord, the power of God. They had seen his face, they said. They were unlocking his mysteries, for in unlocking the power of destruction, they felt they had solved the mystery of creation. They thought they were gods themselves. Now this is what is left.
He rested his right hand on the pile of stones, the crumbling brick covered in wild grasses, with barnacles and clams where the water swirled at their base.
These ruins were but a prelude to the annihilation that was to come. They couldn't see it, the warnings, the cycles of ignorance and violence. And so it led to this.
He waved his hand towards the point where the sky met the sea.
A planet burned to cinder.
From someplace deep in him, resurrecting his audiocom voice, Dag added,
"Religion is the disease, and you, like me, Sabrina, you have sworn an oath to eradicate it at all costs."
He turned to her, and her breath caught. Tears were streaming down his face.
"I'm sorry, Sabrina. I'm sorry that you now know the pain of that oath."
She swallowed hard. This was not the confrontation she had expected. Confusion melted into a strange urge to reconcile with him, even console him. The law is the point at which savagery ended, because civilization stood in its path, she said, afraid she would not even get the words out. You taught me that.
Do not regurgitate at me, Sabrina. She was your friend.
I had my duty.
I am glad to hear that, he said. But I know you love her. And I do too. I love her as I love you.
They were silent a long time, lost in the movement of water and wind. Thank you, Uncle.
But I hate them, he said, suddenly bitter. I hate them for their righteousness, their arrogance, their sanctimony. And I hate them most of all for dragging her and you into this.
They did not seem violent or righteous, she said. Not all of them. When I came upon them, they were peaceful. I think the word is pious.
That is how it begins, Sabrina. It always leads to the same, blood spilt, just as it did yesterday.
I know.
I wanted to protect you. I did not want you involved like this. I never wanted you to have to make such a choice.
Did you know, Dag? About Lindsay?
I knew she was at risk. There were warning signs, the creative, flighty nature, the charismatic personality. And of course, there were the visions.
But you continued to let us remain close.
She was your best friend. I would not deny you that.
Sabrina noted the past tense.
But I was always in touch with her parents, reminding them of the importance of adherence in regards to her medications.
Sabrina recalculated a lifetime of memories. She had never been aware of any contact between Dag and Lindsay's parents. It was no small thing to have the head minister call. Yet, all these years, Lindsay's parents had never made mention of it, likely in an effort to provide a bubble, or normalcy around their daughter and her orphaned friend. She wondered where Lindsay's parents were right now, likely being interrogated in separate cells. Lindsay's brother Sam, too. But the thought of them was pushed away by a more unpleasant one. That she had so many times encouraged Lindsay not to take her medicine so that they could experiment with her visions.
"It's my fault,"
she blurted.
"I've failed her. She failed you."
Sabrina's heart beat a little faster at the attack on her friend.
"I can serve her and the city by ensuring that justice is done." "On other cases,"
Dag said, straightening.
"You will understand now why you must be recused from this one."
Sabrina stammered. "But what if I want to speak on her behalf?" Dag snapped his head around.
"What? You can't be serious."
"For leniency in her punishment. Who better to speak up for her than the cadet who arrested her?"
"Sabrina,"
Dag said, his voice softened.
"I want to see the right thing happen for Lindsay as much as you do."
"She needs help."
"Indeed she does. You can stand by her as a friend, but not as a member of the officer corps."
Sabrina felt her face flush. She could hear the pulse beating in her ears.
"You've already disobeyed me once, Sabrina. But nothing I could do could be worse than the punishment you are experiencing now. Don't squander the goodwill you have earned. You don't know it yet, but you are a hero. The Commissioner has already contacted me to inform me that you will be receiving a prime commendation. No cadet has ever received such a distinction. It was not even my suggestion. It came up through the ranks. Stand by your friend. But as a friend, you have obligations to her, but also to your profession."
She noted the strangeness of his defending her choice to be a cadet for once. A part of her could see the reason in his argument, but another part of her simply hated being told what to do as if she were a child. The wave of emotions she had been restraining the whole morning crested. "What about this decision? Are you making this one as my uncle or head minister? And don't tell me it shouldn't matter, because it does. It does to me." Her head spun with misdirected rage. She had lost, and knew it by the look of pity on his face. She wanted to leave right then, but he answered softly, his eyes imploring.
"I'm asking you, as the only father you have ever known."
The words, "How dare you," hung, held back by her own flexing jaw. After a deep breath, she turned. "Fine," she spat. "I needed some time off anyway." Sabrina anticipated the stares when she reached the station, but not the nods, the handshakes, and claps on the back. The congratulations were restrained. Her fellow officers and cadets were sensitive to the fact that she had brought in her best friend, but she had also broken up one of the largest underground occultist rings in history. The flood of discrimination that had borne down on her so long had reversed. It was so disorienting that she did not know how to react. The only officers who seemed unchanged in their distaste for her were Pitt and Boyle. While the others rose to greet her as she passed them in the vehicle bay, Pitt and Boyle remained seated on the runner of a cruiser. Boyle occupied himself with a fleck of dirt on his visor, while Pitt leaned forward to spit at the ground between her feet. To Sabrina, their normalcy was somehow comforting. The 2 guards outside the doors of the detention wing saluted her. She returned them tentatively, willing herself to believe they were genuine. Xandes jumped up from the seat when she saw her. "Cadet Sabrina! I've never seen our cells fill up so quickly. If you keep this up, we'll have to build another wing." Sabrina had no response and moved quickly to her business. "I'm here to see Lindsay Medina." "Of course." Xandes nodded, picking up a sedation stick and pressing an intercom button in one efficient motion. "Bring prisoner 7919 to interrogation room 2, please." When a voice answered in the affirmative, Xandes straightened so quickly that her white ponytail snapped in the air behind her head. "Please follow me, Cadet." As they made their way down the hall, Xandes offered the sedation stick. "No thanks," Sabrina said. Xandes made a little humph sound, accompanied by a tick of her head. "Well, the guard will have one if she acts up." "She won't." The room was a bare rectangular box, the empty walls interrupted only by the mirrored window, banks of white glow strips on the ceiling, and a surveillance camera high in the corner. A red light switched on beneath the camera's eye, indicating that someone, likely many people, were now watching as Sabrina settled into one of the chairs. As she sat down, she could not decide if her hands went in her lap or on top of the table. She moved them back and forth, uncertain. The door opened before she was ready. It was the guard she saw first, a blocky man with a bald head, giving her a chance to let out her breath. Lindsay entered after him. She was in a white gown, the same as Jacob had worn. Her hands were chained to a waist belt that was linked to ankle braces. The metal jingled as she moved, a sad parody of her bells. Her skin seemed green under the artificial light. Her hair bows were still intact, a scream of color that seemed incongruous in this joyless place. Likely, they had not had the time to remove them with the number of prisoners to process. Something about them reminded Sabrina of the way Jacob's tattoos had stood out so strangely when smothered by the white of the standard-issue prisoner gown. Lindsay stared down at the table, avoiding Sabrina's eyes. "Are you injured?" Sabrina asked, noticing the plasters on Lindsay's arm. "Nothing serious. They patched me up." "I'm glad." A long silence passed, in which Sabrina was acutely aware of the guard and the insistent red light under the camera. "Have they told you what happens next?" Lindsay swallowed. "I've been interrogated. They will process all of us, like they process Scritz." "Rehabilitation?" "Yes." "Do you know what they do?" "No, it's not part of my job." Lindsay nodded and fell silent. Sabrina stared at the long, empty table again. Would it always be like this between them now? Anything she wanted to say, she stopped herself short. There were simply too many people, too many officers, and she was a hero now. What could she say that would not ruin that? "Lindsay, I'm just struggling with why," she said. "I told you in the locker." "But I don't understand." The chain clamored against the edge of the table, and Lindsay slapped both palms down. Sabrina jumped. Lindsay's eyes were filling with tears. "You want to know why? Take a look at the picture of us with my family. You can see why in that." A tear dropped into Sabrina's lap. "We were so happy then." "Look again," Lindsay said. "You'll understand." A fresh patrol suit was waiting in Sabrina's locker, as well as a new blaster. She put them in a carrying case that she dumped into the trunk of her CRP. Normally, she would have kept them in the front seat, but she could not bear the new reminders of her duty now. She rolled through the streets in silence, the stereo off, painfully aware that all the music stored in her roll pod had been selected by Lindsay. She stopped at the intersection of Sterner and Comte streets, hating all the people crossing before her, walking down the sidewalks or passing in their own vehicles. No one escaped her hate. Not the market sellers, nor the bread deliverers, nor the cruiser officers, the teenage boys playing pitchball or the girls braiding one another's hair on a doorstep. They were all still living their lives, while hers had come apart. She rolled through a few twisting old streets before she reached her apartment. It was still early in the afternoon, and the garage was empty. A cold wind blowing in from the sea struck her as she walked between support columns. As she pulled her uniform jacket close, she noticed a swirl of desert sand dancing across the garage floor. It reached the wall, and the wind animating it died, leaving it to fall, just dust on the floor. A cold box in her kitchen was stocked with juices, fruits, and vegetables. Fresh bread and olive oil had been left on the counter. She thought of Sean and smiled. When she went to the washroom to relieve herself, the smell of fresh paint drew her attention to the repaired door frame. This was more than what Sean could have accomplished on his own. She realized the entire station was rallying to support her. She wiped her eyes, glad to finally be alone. Except that she wasn't. Lindsay and her family stared back at her from across the freshly made bed. She sat down on the mattress, the picture in her hands, her eyes moving over the people in the photo, then onto the caterpillars inching their way along the margins. She touched Lindsay, Sam, their parents. None of them had responded to the text message she had sent, informing them that she had seen Lindsay, and that she would be rehabilitated in a few days. No reply at all. But what was there to say to the friend who had betrayed and been betrayed? Everyone looked happy in the picture. No hint of anything sinister. The figures in the background revealed nothing to her, neither did the clouds or the waves, the details of which she had already seen 1,000 times. Although she tried, she could detect no coded message in the swirls of color on the segments of the caterpillars. She even rubbed each one with her thumb, waiting for some sign to appear in a smudge of paint. Then she smashed it. She struck the bedside table repeatedly. The segmented bodies flew, their heads rolled. The frame itself left dents in the table, but she continued to pound it, the glass splintering and breaking, then the frame itself, until the backing snapped, and the last intact piece disintegrated in her hand. The picture fluttered out briefly before landing on the floor, where the blue of the sky stood out in contrast to the white carpet. It was exposed like a precious artifact dropped from its case. Sabrina picked it up, her hand trembling, and turned it over. Lindsay's writing flowed across the back side in looping pink letters. A single line. A single message. Sabrina. Find out what happens to the Scrits.